Hello, Charlie TCG here, and welcome to my breakdown to the European International Championships that was held over this weekend. It was so exciting to see the Scarlet and Violet format evolve in the first ever big tournament for us right now in the English format. So, kind of a little bit what we expected. We did expect it to be the biggest event in Europe. No one predicted it will be the second biggest event at TPCI outside of Japan, which is insane to think, as we've never really had a big tournament in Europe over 1,000 people. We did kind of think the highest placing decks would be Lost Zone, Lugia, and Gardevior or Miraidon. That's kind of what I discussed last week in my top 10 breakdown. And we did think that Lost Zone would have the biggest showing on day one and day two. But how did it actually kind of be provided? So what's really good, Pokemon did actually release a lot of this information with their top 6 placing decks. And to no surprise, Lugia finally got dethroned, so Lost Zone Box could finally take its place by being 20% of the meta. It's an incredibly strong force right now, utilizing Sky Steel Stone and Forest Steel Stone to do those big, either those three to four prizes, or to get those turn one attacks with Dragonite V. Lugia is still just as dominant as ever. With its incredibly good sort of use of single strike, it doesn't feel as oppressive as the last formats have felt with it. It feels a bit more riskier at times. You have to coin flip to get the correct ones, Capture Aroma and sometimes Mesagoza. But it's very nice to see it's doing really well. Gardevoir was the biggest surprise by being in the number 3 spot. Mainly because I've definitely wrote Gardevoir off to be a little bit due to how inconsistent I have found it is in my testing. But of course, people like Tord and Robin, all of that lot, made a very consistent Gardevoir list, and it performed incredibly well. Mew didn't really lose too much. It gained some of the cards again, especially with the Nest Ball. So Mew being very high at the 11.6% was really good. Losso Giratina, that was at the 8.8%. Definitely a bit surprising what I thought it was. A lot of people kind of near the end started to not see as many success with Giratina, especially in the online events, as I talked about on my Friday's video. People really saw it decline in Giratina. And a big surprise, especially, is Hisuian Goodra. This is a list which has been performing pretty well over in Japan the last couple of weeks. It's really kind of ramping up to be really good. And on online events, because Goodra is really, really powerful by doing that blocking, doing 80 damage from it. So looking at the day one, there was 1,517 players. That is insane, especially with Europe's event. And also, in fact, looking at all the other categories as well as juniors and seniors, Pokemon Go, Unite, and VGC, it was probably the biggest event Pokemon has ever held. I luckily got to go there just for the Saturday due to work. And it was so fun to be in the atmosphere. It felt really, really exciting to finally see these huge, big tournaments again, especially in Europe. But if we go to day two, it kind of changes a little bit. We see Lugia Arceus be there to nearly be 30%, very similar to what we've always been seeing, but it had an amazing rate to convert. And the other decks which kind of teetered down to the end was like Gardevoir and the Lost Zone Tina, where the Goodra kind of really pushed up a couple places. Definitely showing its strength and power, but being there's 158 players in there, which is really, really strong. And if we look at this, the conversion rate, the decks which were on day one to go into day two, 16% of the Goodras on day one made into day two, which is a really, really high number, especially considering like the Lost Zone decks were about 8 to 7%. Probably due to how popular they were. Some people didn't, in fact, do the distance as well as they did. But Lugia being about 13% is about average, especially for that high number, kind of going through. So this day two analysis is very exciting to see. Very good to see that these could be our top 6 decks going forward. We don't have like a big tournament in us in the next couple of weeks, so it's good to really use this as an underside and bridging point into where to go next. So with all that being said, let's have a little bit look at the top 8 decks, what decks perform well, and the synergies behind it. The top 8 deck, the first one in 8th place was Miraidon. I was very, very excited to see Miraidon do so well, and getting a top 8 placement I think is really good because it was so hyped up, such an aggressive deck, my favorite archetype, and to get the top 8 placement is really, really good. This one is a little different to what we've seen in other lists. It plays 3 copies of Cramomatic and 1 copy of Echoing Horn and a 4-3 line of Regieleki. The 4-3 line of Regieleki I've been kind of thinking about a lot. It's been seen a bit more success on the online tournaments, and I think it makes sure you're not as reliant on the VMAX as much as possible. But the 3 Cramomatics really does make a lot of sense. Because you're playing these higher counts of Ultra Ball and compared to Nest Ball, you could potentially discard those for those who guarantee to get your Electro Generator, potentially the energy you might need, or the Pokemon, or any card you think would actually help you in that matchup. I think this could be a really good inclusion as a nice of an evolution what Miraidon EX has really started to see. In Echoing Horn, because Miraidon can get those big one-hit KOs potentially early, it can really help with the single prize sort of traits, or potentially even into the big sort of KOs where you can get rid of the Lugias, which I really like having that one Echoing Horn, the high count of Boss and Serena. No Arvins, but they've probably got to replace due to Chromatic, and again the high count of basic energy, and the switching counts as well. Normally we're seeing about 2 switches, which we've seen, but I think people are very scared about sort of the block, the security, not security block, the sort of disruptive control decks. That's why there's really a high count of these switching outs, so they can really go around that. I think this is a definitely exciting Miraidon list, which we could potentially see adapt, not using the Magnezone, which we saw very much win the Champions League a few weeks ago, but having the Chromatics to really help with its control. We did have 2 Lugias kind of get into the top 8, and they actually only just made the top 8, and both of them played the 2-2 lines of Duraludon. I think the other ones already played a 1-1. This is very much focusing more on the Duraludon's attacker, but having the Tyranitar as well. It very much is a more interesting sort of Lugia list, a much thinner list of Lugia, which I'm not be used to seeing at all, being a 3-2 line. We're normally seeing a 4-3 or 4-4. So they've definitely cut on that to move room to having the Duraludon VMAX, the amazing attacks that can't be affected by special energies. So it could, even in the mirror match, it can't be affected by it unless they have a part of the peak down. And doing 213 going through anything is really, really strong. I think this is a very interesting sort of archetype where we're seeing Lugia sort of evolve. We saw single strike Urshifu do well in some of the online stuff, even into some of the day 2, some single strike Urshifu did come in, but the Duraludon in the end did come on top, and even plays the Radiant Serena to really help with your Lost Box or matchup. And Yveltal is a really good single prize attacker to deal with your Mews instead of using your your Tyranitar V. Overall, very, very simple what we've seen before. It does only have the 4 coin flippy cards, which is a Captain Roma, but due to you playing more single strike, you do play the impact energy to another single strike energy, which you can reutilize with Urn of Fatality. The 2 Luminions is really good because you can use that with Professor Barnett, but overall, very exciting to see this new and improved Lugia sort of list, which doesn't feel as oppressive as the other one because you're not constantly getting the turn 1 KO. And into the other sort of list here, a little bit different, tiny bit, due to having 2 copies of Mesagoza and goes down to 1-1 line of Duraludon and a higher count of Lugia. They're not as potentially as greedy as potentially a 3-2 line. This one, they're much more reserved and more respecting sort of the switching cards and getting those Pokemon out as quickly as possible. The Thornton, I think, is very sort of nice, getting rid of the Luminion V, which could be very much a threat. Having the Thornton could change that to potentially a single prize, so you're not giving up an easy 2 prizes. The Clap Stadium, again, very much helps with the Thornton plays, and the 2 Luminions always is to get the Professor Barnett. Very, very nice sort of list. I sort of really like this is the evolution Lugia is kind of going towards, by having Duraludon to really help with those big walling sort of attacks, as well as going through anything. So you don't need to worry too much about the big sort of control sort of archetypes. And the last round of that with top 8 is Lost Zone Goodra. I'm kind of glad we saw Goodra did get a top 8 placement because of how successful it was doing for so long. It's nice to see Goodra ended up getting the top 8 sort of placement. So I really do sort of respect that in a way. I think Goodra is really something you should put on the map. Does play the 2 copy of Drapion, which you've been seeing very common in last format, and now even in the evolving format, people definitely are a bit scared of Gardevoir and also Mew, so you can utilize Mirage Gate to get those big KOs with Drapion as early as possible. The rest of it, very sort of straightforward what we're seeing in sort of Goodra list, higher counts of switch cards, high count of energies. We do play the Melanie, so you can get the extra draw factor, and the 2 Pokegear. I think Pokegear is definitely a really good inclusion in sort of Lost Box sort of list, so you can get out the chorus out if they're going first, go second, or later on in the game where you really might need to dig for that boss's orders or Roxanne. I really like this list of Goodra. It's very clean, very straightforward. It's something which you should definitely start to test and keep it on your radar. Going into top 4s, we do see a first and last placement for Lost Box. He has the Radiant Charizard, which is something which is very, very exciting to see. We've seen this sort of Sable Zard was always looking to be one of the top decks going into the format, but we're now seeing it coming now, which is really, really good. It does play the pitch up, which I really like, especially because it means that Lost Zone doesn't need to worry too much about deck out. They can make, as long as they have a bench space, they can constantly always have that, and they could always be drawing into that pitch up, so never ever got to deck out. And the big tech in this list, which I'm very excited to see, is the Miltank to help with especially some Water decks and use that route attack, but also the Mawile. This card did see quite a bit of play. Even Xander used it as well, making sure the opponent can't retreat. This is a way so you can just power up potentially a Pokemon. You can go behind a little bit to try and like trap something in the active spot. But if it's a deck like something like Lugia, they're not playing many switching cards out. And lots of this sort of not retreating sort of effects is definitely coming in to be a huge effect really in this sort of game. The rest of it, very sort of straightforward. You're trying to get out the turn 1 attack with Sableye, so you play a high count on Pokegear to get the Chorus Experiment, the high counts will switch, you're switching out your Config, and the Lost Vacuum to get that extra two cards in the Lost Zone. I really, really like this list, especially I think Raihan is such a powerful card, and I always think you should try and add it into Lost Zone as much as possible, so I really, really like that. And the high counts of Clara, so you can utilize as many Sableyes or Charizards as possible later on in the game, or even your Drapion V. Really, really like this pot for sort of Lost Zone deck. Very happy to see it was Radiant Charizard as well, a list which I'm very excited and seeing it to be evolving, and kind of to see it's a unique take, especially from Pedro. And to finish off with our top 4 is Pablo Maze's Mew Genesect list. Very sort of the aggressive one with the Path to the Peak, and even Echoing Horn and Fan of Waves. And the 4 copies of Lost Vacuum, so you're constantly trying to protect yourself from the Path to the Peak, as well as being destructive by getting rid of potentially very crucial pool cards or stadiums on the opponent's side of the board. I really, really love this sort of very aggressive Mew list, which is very nice to see Mew do so well and get its top 4 placement. I think Mew is always getting such a good place, and we can see here the only real new card it adds is the 2 copies of Nest Ball, and obviously removed a lot of the stuff. But because Mew is Mew, it does incredibly well. It's incredibly versatile, always going to be a very impressive deck. So I'm really happy to see it be top 4. And the big surprise in the second place is Gardevoir. Fortunately, Tor did in fact get the loss. It was one of the most exciting finals we've seen in such a long time, so it's definitely a thrill to watch. And I really, really enjoyed seeing this very consistent Gardevoir list that Tor has helped come up with. The use of having 2 copies of Zacian V is really, really strong. I think 2 copies of Zacian V probably might be the way for it to go forward to until we get our new set, which if you haven't watched a lot, not yesterday, Monday's copy of Looking Ahead, I talk about how strong Gardevoir EX really has evolved into it. And this is really sort of a good sort of way to see. This doesn't play the Champions Festival, which a lot of people were worried about as being the main stadium card in play, but having the Temple of Sinnoh and Clap Stadium, very, very, very strong. Penny is really nice because you can pick up any of your basic Pokemons in play, maybe potentially get rid of the Luminion you put in there, as well as having some lovely one-off supporters because you play a lot of the drawing aspect of Curlier, so you can have like a one-judge, Worker, Roxanne, Boss, Miriam, and Penny. And the full research is very, very powerful because you want to draw into as much as possible, get the energies in the discard pile. It's just a very consistent version of Gardevoir. I really, really like this sort of list. Only the 1 copy of the regular Gardevoir, because the main attacker in this list will probably be Zacian V. And I do like it does play the Cresselia, so you can put energies around the board and get those big KOs with Moonlight Reversal. I think this is definitely a masterclass to show exactly how Gardevoir can be built in this format, something which, if you're brand new to it, that want to understand Gardevoir, definitely pick up this list, try it out on live, try it out at locals, and just learn about sort of matchup. Because I think this is the best way to evolve and learn about Gardevoir because of how consistent Tor is made, because he's always known to make very consistent lists. And he lost to Alex Szymanski's Arecus Duraludon, which is mainly more like a toolbox. This is very exciting to see he finally got a win. So it's really, really nice to see, especially with his very unique take in Arecus Duraludon. People thought this list definitely was a little bit dead, but did play the 1/1 line of Alolan Vulpix, which is really good to stop the Pokemon which have abilities in play to attack it. So I really, really love this. And sort of this energy sort of thing, this big disruptive stuff, the more copies of Judge, the 4 copies of Lost City, as well as the Sharon's Care, to really do some healing, be disruptive, and kind of like lock your opponent out and play. I do like the 2 copies of Drapion V, because that can really help in your Gardevoir as well as your Mew matchup, so you can constantly get the KOs that sort of way. I think this is such a really interesting take, because we've seen Arecus Duraludon do well in sort of Japan, but we've never seen it do it to success, especially with Alolan Vulpix. And even I've noticed in Japan, Alolan Vulpix is really starting to creep up to be a card which people probably thought they've written off saying, nah, it's not good. It's actually coming in to be very, very clutch, especially if you think a lot of Pokemon with abilities, or I think its abilities are actually doing these big attacking sort of in the format. So I really thought this was definitely one of the most exciting EUICs I've seen in a while. So initiative and such a diverse top 8. Definitely a change from the big Lugia and Lost Box, which you've been seeing so often. So I'm really excited to see the evolve in sort of the next coming weeks. I think definitely something looking forward to on reflecting about this EUIC is we should definitely start to respect Gardevoir EX. This is definitely something which I wrote off. Some people were kind of going with, oh, let's go with Mewtwo V Union and Champions Festival. And we saw towards said you don't need that to be consistent or do well. So I think that's definitely something which we could kind of go away from this list, which is became very popular, and go back to Zacian V right now and attacking with the regular Gardevoir. I think Lost Zone we shouldn't be like saying, no, we don't need to play it anymore. It's still a threat. It's still incredibly powerful. It definitely is something which we should definitely respect going forward. And again, like I said on Monday's video with the new format we had there with the new set, with as a new format for us right now, it's still in its early stages. It's still got time to grow. We could go back to a very Lugia heavy dominated format. We could go to see Goodra finally see its incredible success, which we've always wanted it to be, or Gardevoir just dominates right now. We're always going to be learning and adapting. This is definitely something which was so exciting to see. Already, we're seeing the top level players play unique lists. We saw Xander's very creative control list. We've seen very interesting Miraidon list by going with Cameratic, stuff we haven't noticed or seen in Japan's format. So it's nice to see that we're getting some of that evolution. So that's all I have time for today to talk about my breakdown and recap of what happened at EUIC. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you're new, please make sure to like and subscribe. Comment down below what sort of deck you think could be going forward to be a very much consideration. And I hope you've enjoyed this video for now. See you guys soon. Bye-bye.